This episode of This Agile Life has been brought to you by BrilliantAgile.com, providing Agile and Scrum training, consultancy, and personnel.
BrilliantAgile.com. Done right, it's brilliant.
Released on Sunday, May 3rd, 2015. This Agile Life, episode 83. The price is right!
The software industry transforms more and more every day. Agile methods are quickly replacing traditional ones. The question is, are you agile enough? This podcast is devoted to agile and lean software development. Time to welcome your agile coaches on This Agile Life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Agile Life, a podcast about what it's like to be agile in the real world. Well, we've got a treat today, because guess what, everybody? Tonight it is just myself, Jason Tice, and one other person. That is, introduce yourself.
Craig Buchak, come on down.
Oh my goodness, it's like the price is right tonight. And so, yes, it's just the two of us tonight. And when Craig and I first connected on Skype, Craig, should we tell people how we started to form our mental model for the evening? What did we do?
I suppose. I'm not sure what we did.
You don't remember? It was like just the two of us.
Oh, that's right.
And it was we
started singing.
Yeah, I noticed.
I probably won't do that now that we're recording, though.
And see, I guess I'm not afraid to do anything. So I have not, as we talked, but we talked to Renee Trouton.
It's not so much fear as don't want to, hurt the listeners' ears.
Really? See, I guess when we had Renee Trouton on our last episode 82, she talked about people who have yet to lose their inner child, and I guess that unfortunately describes me.
Oh, I'm one of those people too, though.
But you won't sing on a podcast? Come on.
Ready? Just the two of us. We can make it if we try. Just the two of us. You and I.
Okay, so hey, we're increasing our entertainment value here on This Agile Life. We've got Lee, who could do Winnie the Pooh and Elvis, and Craig is now available to do. He's the new wedding singer that's going to be in demand for 2015. So you want to connect with Craig now because I'm sure he's the guy you want to come out and do your wedding.
Nice. Didn't you make John Sexter do that like a week or two ago?
I can't get John to do anything because everyone knows that John's just too busy asserting his dominance.
Oh,
he's a benevolent.
I think he said that in joke the first time.
He's a benevolent
take it
dictator. I know it's just become the oldest joke. We got to retire that one. So, but all kidding aside, so Craig and I are here tonight, and this is kind of neat because Craig, you've been busy lately, and so as we've been keeping the release train of This Agile Life rolling, you've been consuming some of our content, and you have a few thoughts on a few of the things that we might have said on recent episodes. And so for discussion tonight, we thought we'd run some of these down. And so I know I said a few things that you have some questions about. So why don't you tell us where you want to start tonight?
All right. So most of these are things that you guys called me out. So in episode 78, you guys talked about TDD, or at least you were going to talk about it, then decided that you really didn't have very different opinions from each other. And you guys talked about it a little bit, but
we talked about it for 12 minutes still, so that was kind of funny.
Yeah. So I actually have a bigger difference in opinion than that group of people did. You guys basically said always test, always do TDD, and I disagree with that. I say only do TDD when the benefits outweigh the costs. Now, I don't think any of you guys would actually disagree with that. Now, the problem is that the costs rarely outweigh the benefits. I think most people underweigh the benefits of TDD or testing in general. And I think the discussion also kind of mixed up testing and TDD, and probably rightly so. There are benefits to testing, and there are additional benefits to testing first, or driving your design with tests. So I guess the first question is that I would need to answer before determining when the benefits don't outweigh the costs. How much? What is that cost? What does it cost to do TDD? or testing? Do we actually know? Do we have any empirical studies on that?
Is that a question for me? Or I guess that number
Yes.
one, that's a great question for any of our listeners to let us know and, contact us at, via Twitter at This Agile Life. Ah, boy. So I didn't realize this was going to be a Agile white paper test tonight. So that's tough. Because what you don't really see, or what I'll share I've seen is organizations that as part of a transformation, they embrace the practice of testing as part of development. Let's call it where they're testing as part of development and not say it's necessarily true test-driven development. Is that okay?
Sure.
And what they see is they do see over time the shift to where the amount of, I want to say, release testing. So, all the traditional manual test activities that many times were at one point the only test activities, they shift away from that to where if they have defects, they find those sooner in the development process when it is less costly to fix those. And
so that's the benefit, but what's the cost?
Well, so the cost is it's a cost savings, I guess, is what I'm describing.
No. Well, but that's you take the cost and you subtract the benefit, and you end up with the cost savings because you end up with more benefit than cost.
Yes.
But first of all, we need to know the cost.
Well, so the cost is there was some additional time incurred as part of the development to write those tests.
Right.
And if you're not doing any type of testing as part of your development, you would not do that work. And instead, you would finish the code, and then you would test it later on. So you would get to, you could is a key word here. You could get to that, some element of that test step faster. But at that point, that test step, since your test at that point is not automated, is going to be more expensive to execute.
So what do you think it cost us in time to do testing for the developers to write tests?
The developers write tests, and to be fair, we're talking unit testing and maybe some type of functional testing in the code. So this is code testing. I am not, I'll share, Craig, I guess I've been in that environment where we've been doing that so long, and or we're in an environment where we introduced that practice very early on. I have a hard time answering that question. I mean, how about, you?
I wish we had, I've seen the numbers for pairing, and the cost of pairing is about 15%. But I don't recall ever seeing any numbers on the cost of testing.
The only thing is I could say, and I know some of the things we've talked about, as good solid design principles for code, is that if you keep methods small, ideally I should be able to go in and write a test or modify a test for a method very quickly. So if your code is not architected that way, so you're kind of saying where, hey, I've got a bunch of code that has no tests, I'm going to start testing and I'm going to start refactoring, that is going to take time. If you're starting greenfield and you do it the right way from day one, and you keep your code clean and you keep your tests clean, the additional time required to write these tests should be minimal. Does that make sense?
I found some numbers.
Oh, okay.
Luckily, I blogged about it when I found them the last time. And I'll post these to the show notes. So, does test-driven development really improve software design quality? What do these studies tell us? They tell us TDD costs about 10 to 30% in short-term productivity. All right, so there's your cost. Basically, about 10 to 30%.
So you're telling me that if
there's our cost.
Whoa, but I don't agree with that, because that goes against what I just said before. Whereas if I'm doing TDD the right way, I'm going to be able to complete and deliver my work faster. So yes, my development activities may take a little bit longer because I have to write those tests as I'm writing the code. But long term, because then I have those tests, I'm going to be able to deliver faster. So
right. So that delivering faster is due to some other benefit besides the cost.
Well, but again,
right? So that's part of the benefit. So the benefits are reducing bugs by 30 to 90% and decreasing code complexity by about 30%.
Well, put it this way, that's okay. I'm gonna challenge that because that assumes you have a team that accepts the feedback that the tests provide. So again, let's talk about the scenario where you're starting to write tests on code that is not tested, and because you never had that challenge, it doesn't force you to refactor the code. So, okay, I could go in, I could take a really long method, and I could figure out how to test it without refactoring it. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah,
so.
it's going to be really hard.
Funny.
Yeah, you laughing. Again, that's where you and I, it's hard to talk about this because we understand this, but that's where we could technically do it. And I've seen people do this. What it needs to be, though, is where, hey, okay, I go into test. Wow, that test was really hard to write. That's the process of writing a test, giving the team or the developer feedback that, hey, your architecture is not loosely coupled. You need to go start making incremental changes to make your code cleaner. And that's to me where, as a developer, you need to be committed to improving the quality of your code so that you decide to do that. If you say, nope, I wrote a test and I can even run my code coverage and I can see that the changes I made to the code are covered by the test that I just wrote and the method is still 280 lines long and I could commit and ship. Guess what? People do that, Craig. Right. I mean, I know you don't. Even when I develop, I don't. But there are people that do that. And so
you're talking about the difference between test-driven primarily and just writing tests.
Well, I'm just saying.
And even just test first versus test-driven. Test first, you can write the test first. You can make the code work and then not refactor. That would be test first, but it would not be test-driven. The part you said about where you get feedback from the test, that's the test-driven part.
Yeah, but even still, I think, put it this way, even if you're writing a test after the fact, but it's like, hey, okay, I'm on a team. We have agreements to say we're going to write unit tests, and we do not write them first. Okay? So, okay, I go in, I make a 3-line code change in a 280-line method. Perfect. And then I run my code coverage and it says, your new change is not covered by tests because it's new. So that makes sense. Then it actually takes me longer to write those tests because the code is not clean. I think that's where people say, this is too hard, and they give up on the practice of any type of automated testing as part of development, regardless of if it's TDD or if it's just unit testing.
True, and the hard part's always up front, right?
Well, yeah. It's
in some ways that cost is up front, but the benefits are longer term, so it's harder to see them. And feel.
Well, and I guess the other thing too that I'm saying when I think about my first scenario I described, which is again, maybe I've been hanging out with the Kanban guys too much, but it's all about delivery. And the number one metric we should be tracking is, cycle time to deliver. And at that point, what's important is, yes, you should do some analysis to say, okay, how much time am I spending at each step of my workflow? But the metric that really matters that gets us to cost is saying end to end, just get it done, cycle time. And so at that point, yes, you will take a little bit longer to write code, but long term, you'll be able to release faster. So I don't know if that clarifies anything for you, Craig, about that. I did want to ask you a follow-up question about one of your initial points you brought up, because I'd like to know, and I put it this way, I've worked with teams where, and I know Amos always says that we have working agreements where, hey, if we're spiking, we agree we don't do TDD, but we also agree we throw the code away as soon as the spike's done, and we don't. That way, we aren't tempted to try to merge it in without test coverage. How do you manage, or could you give us an example of some working agreements you've used where you've been able to manage across a team policies about when to test and when not to test that have been able to be effective, and someone doesn't start to break the rules?
I don't know if I've got any examples like that, but personally, on my own projects where I do test, I do test in most of my projects unless they're experimenting, spiking.
Yeah, the spike rule, which is pretty common. Yeah. That's almost.
But when I'm writing real code, I do write tests, but I do not write tests for Rails controllers. And you guys had mentioned you don't write tests for getters and setters. I don't write tests for boilerplate, basically. And usually my controllers are boilerplate. There's not much going on. It's not just like every other controller. There's nothing special to most of my controllers. If there is something special, I will actually add a test for it.
Okay, so what I'm hearing a lot in your statement there, Craig, I'm hearing a very evil word in the Agile space. I'm hearing the word my code.
I was talking about individual projects.
Okay.
Projects.
Put it this way, if you're doing your own thing, I totally get that. I mean, and that's where
I can't say that I do as I say, not as I do. I'm saying do as I do. And here's the cases where I don't write tests.
Well, but that's you personally. And so this is where I think this is a unique conversation if it's about your personal projects where you can single-handedly make your own decisions without the need to collaborate and discuss pros and cons and trade-offs. And it gets really hard to do that on this topic in particular the second you inject one other person.
No, if I would advise teams to not test Rails controllers. I don't think there's anything going on in them.
But then how?
I think they're boilerplate.
Okay,
I think they're boilerplate enough. But on the other hand, if it's just a simple for loop, well, I will always test a simple for loop.
So, Craig, I show up on your team as some new guy, okay? Really rusty Rails developer over here, okay? Call me that. How do I learn this stuff? Because what you're saying is you've got some design standards or some design patterns that either you've advocated for, maybe you've advocated for, and the team has adopted them, hopefully. But I don't agree, or I don't even know that, so I just start writing controllers that are, 15 lines each because they got all kinds of logic in them that tell the controller what to do. Because guess what? Some people write controllers like that, okay? So At that point, I come in, I start putting that in the code base, and what happens?
I see what you're saying. There's another point, actually, with Rails controllers that covers my ass. That's that I have user acceptance level tests. So the controllers are actually exercised at that level. So there is a level of testing still involved in.
Yeah, well, and if we want to backlog a topic, there's a whole conversation about TDD in the Rails Ruby ecosystem. That's really that's a you. I'd love to tag along, but I'm really not an expert in that field. But that's you, Amos, Nate Mackey, who's sometimes on with us. You guys need to have a conversation about that because I know I've put Rails developers into a traditional object-oriented based test-driven development class, and they sit there for 3 days twiddling their thumbs because it's not relevant, because it's a different beast if you're in the Rails ecosystem. So
yeah, the Rails has some problems. It's a great MVC framework, but it's not very object-oriented. Models tend to mix at least 2, if not 3, 4, or 5 different purposes in one class. So that makes problems, makes it more difficult to test, right? So
since we've I wanted to ask you a question though. So since we've identified the great way we can have awesome episodes of This Agile Life is to call other people out, I do want to know what you would do about this design pattern question I've asked you. Lee was supposed to join us for this episode, but he had something come up. So Lee, would say no documentation of any kind. I know this having worked with Lee. And
Amos says the same thing.
Well, okay. So,
he won't even allow a one-line comment half the time.
So I'm the rusty Rails guy that shows up on your team that says, you know what, I like Java, so I'm going to make my Rails controllers look like Java controllers, and they're going to have 15 lines at least of logic in there to tell the controller what to do, which... Again, I agree with you. Knowing a little bit about Rails, that's not a good idea. But yes, I could technically do that. So how do I learn from you that that's not a good idea on your team? Is that where you're going to just tell me? Or would you actually write these down or something? So,
unfortunately, a lot of that is tribal knowledge, but that's why we pair, right? So the tribal knowledge gets spread around really quickly.
I would take it a step further. I would say that's why we share work. Maybe it's not pairing, maybe it's mobbing, maybe it's something else, but it's where the whole thing that I guess I jumped on you for here in this conversation was when you were saying my code. So if you're on a team with at least 2 real people, there is no my code. So in that case,
well, it's all my code. It's all our code.
Well, it should be our code, not my code.
It's shared ownership. It's still shared ownership. Your wife and you, I think we're in a common property state. Your wife and you both own everything that you own.
Oh,
Still call my, right?
Can we have a legal conversation here for everyone who's like not in a common property state? Okay, we shouldn't do that. So,
right.
But okay.
Okay. First of all, I contend that there is a cost to writing tests.
And you know what? I would agree with that totally.
And you have to weigh the cost against the benefit. The problem is that you're almost always going to underweigh the benefit. You're usually going to get more benefit out of it than you realize. There's a few cases where that's probably not the case, and that is so the case where time to market is more important than anything else, and more important than quality. You just need to get something out, be first to market. I don't think that ever really happens, and when you do that, you say, oh, we're going to throw it away, and we're going to, as soon as we capture the market or whatever, we're going to replace it with quality code.
Okay, but time out,
Your
Craig.
code is going to last a lot longer than you expect.
Craig, stop talking about unicorns, okay? That doesn't ever happen.
Oh, what? People always make that excuse.
Well, I'm saying they make that excuse, but does the code ever get thrown away? No. It's still 20 years later. It's still in prod. Okay, so
right.
That's where I want to make sure everyone understands it.
Look at Y2K. If you don't believe code can last longer than expected, look at Y2K.
Yeah, but that's a unicorn. So if you're out there and you're on a team and you're struggling, or you feel pressured by your product owner to say, "Hey guys, just get it done real fast." This is where the team, and again, I've seen a lot of product owners, they like to ride the team like a horse and they kick the horse until it dies, the team needs to be empowered, and the team has a voice in saying, this is how we need to work to ensure we have a sustainable process. And so, hey, this thing might be the thing that makes or breaks our company. Yes, we know we need to get it done fast, but we also need to do it the right way, because if it makes it, we might not have the money to redo it, so we gotta be smart about it. So,
well, but if you don't make it to, win in the market, you're also not gonna make any money. So
but see, to me, that goes back to exactly what I've been saying, and I guess it proves I've been drinking too many Kanban-tinis with the Kanban guys, is you gotta say, I gotta learn how to get my stuff out the door faster. And so at that point...
Wait. So you're saying that Agile has a way to make us faster?
Yeah, it's called Scrum. That's why we sprint. No, just kidding. Well, no, but what I'm saying...
I thought Agile was about quality. I didn't realize Agile was... You could just, turn up the crank and get people to go faster by telling them to go faster.
No, that's not what I'm saying, Craig. You got to balance the approach. But a lot of times people struggle, and if anything, I see them, to their credit, they emphasize quality, which is good, but they emphasize quality at the and they increase their cost of delay to release. So to me, that's where you got to keep that in check and say that I've got to accept the challenge to say that if I want to have true business agility, I've got to be able to release when I need to. And so at that point, you've got to make smart decisions that ensure that when you have something you're ready to release, you're able to do so without a lot of additional work, which drives the need for automated testing. Does it make sense?
I think there are ways to choose the amount of quality you're going to put into a product. In fact, your company views that as one of the principles. So I think you can choose to imbue a product with less quality knowingly, if you have a good reason. Now, I don't think I think a lot of people think they have that good reason, but I don't think any of them do. I think you're right. It is sort of unicorn, where a lot of people think, hey, I'm a special unicorn. We need to get this to market. We don't care how many bugs it has. We just need to get it out there. I think that's a mistake, but I think that's good reasoning. I think it's based on bad facts, though.
Well, or put us place. Since we do a podcast, we know we got listeners. Tell us a story, guys, or guys and gals out there. Tell us a story. So Craig and I are saying, and again, I'm calling it a unicorn, to say that this idea of, hey, ship the prototype as fast as possible, and if it makes it big, we're gonna redo it. And we'll
I would like to hear
because that to me, I will go on record and say that I bet it has happened. I'm sure it's happened somewhere.
I would like to hear a story where someone chose to dial back the quality, possibly by not doing testing or thoroughly testing, or consciously choosing to have less code coverage of their tests. And I would like to hear any success stories of that. I think they're going to be few and far between. I don't even expect there to be a listener right now that has a story about that.
Well, and here's the other one that I will share as
as
kind of a listener and also a contributor. This is the other one that I know will win. Is if you measure your total investment between doing a project with automated testing whereby there's no rework, hence we build it right with automated testing, test-driven development from day one. So to the point that, you know what? Hey, we've been working on it for 3.5 months. We've released it. If it's a web product, say we've got 500 million users. It's awesome. You know what? We can just stop and we can walk away and we can just let it run and we can let it generate revenue for our business. And at that point, all of that is money in the bank. If you do it right the first time, I guarantee you that your total investment to build that product will be less than if you kind of kick it out the door, get some data. Okay, hey, it looks like great. Let's go redo it now the right way. I guarantee, even just because of the context change and the cost of delay, it will cost you less to do the testing the first time. I mean, does that make sense, Craig? Or do you think that's something that like the PMI even endorses in the PMI ACP curriculum for how to do Agile.
You threw me for a loop a little with the PMI.
Well, I'm talking about PMI. But, that's for our friend John Sextro, who loves to talk about MBAs and how they don't know anything. I don't know
what my mortgage insurance has to do with anything.
Oh, anyways. Well,
I think you're sort of talking about the difference between startups that take venture capital versus bootstrapping, sort of.
Yeah, kind of. I'm just saying.
Bootstrapping, usually ends up more effective.
Yeah,
slow but steady wins the race too, right?
Yeah. Usually. So I put it this way. That's I would love to. Like I said, I think we agree on this idea that this whole saying that we can, like you kind of said, completely forego testing and then come back and do it later. That's the one that I'd love to hear the story of how you have a sustainable process with your team where you're able to do that in a repetitive fashion.
All right. So I've got one other example of where I would condone not testing.
Okay, bring it on.
Not automated testing. That's where you have no test framework that will work in your situation, and writing it is going to take longer than you have available. Let's say you've got a language. Again, I think sometimes we overestimate the cost and underestimate the benefits.
So, Craig, what do you think I'm going to say to that, if you know my background?
You're probably going to say write it anyway.
Then
you've run out of money and you haven't even written any code. You're still working on the test framework.
I'm going to say more as someone who focuses more on the business side. I'm going to say that sounds like an opportunity. That if you're like in an emerging market or some new language, I remember when. I was working. I was helping a group write Objective-C training courses when Swift came out back in 2014, and it was like, well, what do we do? Does Swift what kind of test capabilities are in Swift? And we're like, well, it's really kind of not there yet. I was like, well, is there an opportunity to build one and make it available? And it's a test framework, so right up front, I'll disclose you're not going to sell it and make a lot of money because you're probably going to give it away. But guess what? You grow influence. And that, if you're in an organization, that could be invaluable. It's intangible value, but it could help you grow reach. It could help you find clients. It could help endorse other products you have. I mean, greatest example of that I think out there, Craig, you should know. It's the whole Rails framework that basically drives the products that 37 Signals sells that they give away.
So how big is your company?
What? My company?
That you work for, yes.
That I work for? It's like 200 people.
All right. So if you spend a few developer weeks, your company can take that, right?
Yeah, totally.
If my company, just me, one person, took 2 weeks without getting paid, that would hurt me a lot more than it would hurt your company.
Put it this way, that's a business business discussion. I mean,
it's a business decision, right?
Well, it's a business decision. It's how you want to run your business. I mean, if we had Amos here
So
tonight,
so you agree with me?
well, no,
it is a business decision, cost versus benefit, whether I should write my own test framework.
Well, I'm saying if you want to run a business and you want to, and the nature of your business, it could be strategic in nature. You've got to have reserves. So the way I was going to say in the theme of the episode tonight is calling other people out. I know if Amos were here, Amos, to his credit, he said that he's got a plan where. I remember he told a story once where he was looking for a job, and I was like, Amos, how are you surviving? He's like, I got reserves, and I do this whole complete debt free thing. He's got all, so he's got a plan. He sat down, he figured it out, and as a result, he has some flexibility. So that's where Craig, I would say there's an opportunity for you there if you.
I would say you need to check your privilege. You have that privilege. Your company has that privilege. Not all the listeners have that privilege.
Well, yeah. Plus, wait, but you got to control your destiny. So, Craig, if you want to be able to do that and you have your own business, guess what? You're empowered to go figure out how to do that and start to work in a margin where you can maintain a reserve and build up a reserve over time. It's going to take some time, or you got to say, hey, is this a strategic thing that I want to go get money for? I mean, there's lots of crazy ways to get money these days where, Kickstarter, there's peer-to-peer loans. I mean, there's lots of ways to get money if you find something that you feel could be strategic. And then it's a business decision. Do you want to do something to front it?
Yeah, but it's also a business decision. Should I give up the work I was getting paid to do? Hear that? I'm getting paid to do a project for someone.
Okay.
And now you're telling me to give that money up and find some other way to make money to make my test framework first.
But think about it. You build a test framework,
There's no but.
No, you build a test
There's
framework.
There's no but. That's cost-benefit analysis.
No.
Period.
Time out. Okay, it's cost-benefit, but some of the benefits are intangible. So you, Craig, you go out there and you take some emerging language.
Talk about unicorns.
No.
Come on. You got someone giving you money and you want to stop and say, no, I need to write a test framework. That's ridiculous.
No, I'm saying, number one, look at how open source software has changed the world. People are intrinsically motivated to work on it. And it provides value and influence. So, Craig, you write this awesome test framework for this new emerging language, and guess what? Next thing you know, people want you to come and consult and train and help other people use it. And maybe someone approaches you to buy it out because you figure out how you retain some time back.
That's great, but I don't give up my current job to do that.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. If you are intrinsically motivated to do that, like many people
But I'm not going to give my current job up to do that.
What I was going to say,
I might do it in a couple months when I finish my current job.
Well, or maybe it's it's a hobby job. It's something that you're intrinsically.
I'm not going to spend the company's money that's paying me to say, wait, I'm not going to deliver anything for 2 months because I got to go write a test framework. I want to be agile and I want to deliver something on the first week.
Well. There are scenarios.
Stumped you on that one.
No. There are.
You can't be stumped. Are you saying you can't be stumped?
I'm just saying that there is.
You need to talk about your ego on an episode.
No. I just am saying that there are business scenarios where that idea of saying, hey, maybe I stop work, but I'm going to do this strategic, build this thing that may provide greater values long term.
All right, I challenge you to quit your job. Start that business right now.
But see, people do that.
See, you made a cost-benefit analysis, didn't you? And that wasn't worth it.
Well, no, because I don't have a plan. I mean, I don't have if I had a test framework idea plan, I would go work on it, but I don't have one right now.
You would quit your job and go work on it.
If I had an idea like that, I would do that.
You've never had a good idea since you've worked at your current company.
I've had ideas, but I've also have leadership that is very open to discussions, and so we've talked about ways to pursue them as part of what I currently do. So that's just, put this way, careers are individual choices, and there's advantages to working independently, and there's advantages to working in all types of organizations. And my call actually as a coach, as a career coach, when I work with clients, I challenge them to say, go out and make sure that you're in a scenario that meets your needs. And if you're not, do something about it. So... Make sense?
Not really. So you're telling me to put a low risk scenario on hold for a high risk scenario.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If that's something you really have passion for, figure out a way to do it. And if your current,
but that doesn't. passion is different from my current cost benefit analysis on whether I should do it now.
Well, no, but you're in an environment where you don't have an
yes. Don't say no.
You're in an environment where you don't have an R&D budget. If you were in an organization that had an R&D budget, either something that you provided to yourself or an organization.
What part of independent contractor didn't you hear? The company that is paying me to write software in this scenario isn't going to pay me extra to write the test framework because it provides no immediate benefit to them.
So, Craig, what I want to challenge you to do is I want you to think be more than just an independent contractor. I want you to be just, this is me talking to you as a career coach. I want you to be more like your own little firm where, you figure out a way that long term you have your own little internal R&D budget. And
that's fine. It doesn't help the situation for this customer I'm with this week.
Okay. So
that's what I'm trying to talk about. How am I supposed to solve this customer's problem today when there is no test framework for them? You've got this old pie in the sky thing, but it doesn't help my current situation when I don't have a test framework and I'm using a new technology to help a customer meet his needs.
So this goes back to, this would be a scenario where you don't do any type of automated testing simply because there's no way to do it.
Yes. No. I would probably find a simple way to do unit tests sort of as a spot checking thing. Because you can always write a simple unit test, right? You can always say assert 1 + 1 = 2.
You can write code to call code. So then eventually, to me, that's where test frameworks come from, because people figure out patterns and they extract those.
But you can't necessarily, when you get into trouble, it's more complex things like how do I test, a whole website?
Yeah.
How do I mock out?
But if you're testing a whole
how do I mock out a complex API? Is usually where you get in real trouble.
Yeah, but if you're testing a whole website, that's again where, guess what? We've got frameworks and products that can do that.
Right. Well, I was making an example. The complex API that I need to mock out is usually where you fall down.
Yeah, no, I would agree, and that's what there's the frameworks play at. But if that's what you're building right now, you could do some level of, well, put it this way, I want to call it acceptance testing. So to me, again, every scenario is different, Craig. So what I would challenge you to think about is, are there ways that, okay, maybe you can't do by the book TDD because you don't have a unit level framework to test with, but ultimately you're building something that presents data that is consumable, right? Either it's visual or it's a service or whatever. Yes, I hope. Or is it setting out ethos? So to me, maybe it's where, okay, guess what? Take the Janet Gregory, Lisa Crispin test pyramid, take that thing, pretend you never saw it, because we're not going to have beautiful unit tests. But maybe because of the nature of your environment, you know what? Hey, we're going to go a little heavy on acceptance tests that we drive through our web interface, and we effectively do, more of a acceptance test driven development approach. So we get that validation, and we have tools available to do that. And then long term, after you do this project, you fund an R&D budget for your little firm, and then you could do that strategic thing that's going to make you famous.
So I think launch the rockets is one of the things, you want to mock out, but it's hard to test if you actually launch the rockets, right? I'm writing rocket launching code.
Okay.
And I don't have very many spare rockets, to test with. So I'm somehow going to have to mock that out.
And that API is so complicated,
right,
that I have a hard time.
I have a hard time mocking out an entire rocket's function.
Okay, but you've got a thing there that's if it's an API, I'm struggling, and again, I'm just learning about this myself as you're describing it. I'm struggling.
If you never used SOAP is very complicated.
Yeah, but I'm struggling to say how you couldn't have another computing node running one of the test products or frameworks out there that calls in and does acceptance level testing of your stuff. So it's not going to be fine-grained unit testing because whatever technology you're using doesn't have a unit framework. Fine. But there is still significant value that you would get from having that acceptance level testing that, given the unique scenario you have described, I think would provide value. And
so that may or may not be the case. I could probably, if I'm able to mock out that back end, but I said that's probably the part that I'm going to have trouble with. If I can mock out that back end, then I can use Selenium and Cucumber or, on any language pretty much. And I can mock out I can acceptance test a web framework if I can mock out the back end. But I'm saying if you can't mock out that back end in a reasonable amount of time, you might have to punt.
Well,
now,
or is it just you need to examine the problem? To say that I know I've worked in environments where we had brittle.
So I have a 3-week project, and it's going to take 5 weeks to write a test framework to mock out what I need to mock out. What do I do? Help me, Jason, help me.
I'm thinking. Thinking takes time. So am I allowed to think? Or is this where I just have to talk? To me, this is where, let me ask you this. Did you know this going into it? Like the nature of the tech stack, and so to say, hey...
It's just a scenario here.
Well,
I've actually had we'll call it a permanent job, where I was working with some cloud stuff, and I ended up writing a web framework, a small web app using a framework I wasn't familiar with, that I was constrained to, and didn't have a test framework to help me, and didn't have the opportunity to write one, or really the knowledge of that stack to write one. And so I was at a loss. I had to do the best I could. I wrote without tests except for unit testing some of my... I did have unit tests, but I had no acceptance or integration tests. So I had to live with that, and there wasn't much I could do about it due to my constraints that I had.
Well, and I guess the reason why I was asking if you knew this when you started the engagement or the support is this an opportunity from Agile where we talk about customer collaboration, really customer collaboration over contract negotiation, to say that, hey, we started this project. And I mean, to me, it's like the thing that just popped in my head, Craig, was the story that Woody Zuhl told when we had him on about no estimates. And it was the story that, hey, you hire a contractor to work on your kitchen for 3 weeks, and you've got this glorious plan to make it beautiful. And he goes over and he rips out the cabinets and he finds the floors rotting because the pipe's leaking. And at that point, it's like, hey, we just uncovered this. To me, in having done a renovation where that kind of happened, you have a conversation. What do you want to do? I could get it done on the same budget, same timeline, but I'm going to have to make it basic because I got to fix the pipes, okay? You don't want me to put your new cabinets and everything on top of the rotten floor with the leaky pipes because it's just all going to go downhill. Or, hey, this test framework is going to provide long-term value to your organization that's building this new product. What could we do to talk about that? Maybe we say that our initial release is going to be a little bit less because we are going to be building this framework that, like we've already established here, that's going to slow us down, but it's going to provide long-term value. And if your organization you're supporting understands that, again, Agile calls us to be partners with our clients. So to me, it's give and take. So maybe it's a little bit longer engagement for you. The client gets more value. They get their product and they get a framework that they can use to maintain their product going forward.
But did the benefit outweigh the cost?
Well, to me, and again, this is
to you. That's you're just making stuff up now.
No, I'm not. I'm being completely serious.
Saying the cost probably will outweigh the benefit, and I would advise them not to spend that cost.
But I guess I don't know enough about the product to say is it
you can't even imagine a cost outweighing a benefit. I don't think.
No, I'm
you're so zoned into that TDD is the right thing to do. You can't even imagine a scenario.
Well, put it this way, I've seen a lot of data where there's been challenges, and I've also seen and been successful in some environments about talking about, again, working with stakeholders to say, here are the trade-offs. And if anything, my role typically as a consultant is to say, I respect whatever decisions you make. I'm simply here to advise and consult and give some advice and help you understand pros and cons. And at that point, I've talked through the exact scenario that I've almost described here with clients to say this is the trade-offs, and or hey, you've identified a unique need here that's something we didn't know about. are we okay if we shift our focus for the next 2 weeks and we figure out a way that we could do, automated, we can fake out the back end you were talking about so that, guess what? If the back end goes down, we don't have to stop development because we can fake it out. Is that okay? And people have said, yeah, it sounds good because I don't want to be down if the back end goes down. So, hey, go take care of that for us, and working with your customer as a partner, you should have those conversations and then figure out what to do. And guess what? You win some and you lose some. So you gotta be prepared to handle it, but you should have that conversation, Craig.
I'm shocked that as a consultant, you found a way to gouge the company for more money.
Well, no, I think Craig, that's a disrespect.
Or that you recommended that they spend more money.
Well, but Craig, actually, Craig, I'm going to call it.
So you didn't say anything about cost-benefit analysis in there at all.
Craig, actually, no.
And you seem incapable of saying that.
No, Craig, I'll be completely honest because you know what? That's.
Have you ever had a situation where you said that the customer should not spend more money on testing?
No, but here's what consulting is in the Agile space, okay? And maybe this is where I'll share from my background and I'll share with John, having invested significant time to go to business school, some of the things they actually teach you there. And again, you're working
apparently not cost-benefit analysis. Well,
you're working within a run rate. So to me, it's saying that you have an investment that you're making, and you're talking about the investment. What provides the greatest value to the organization? And at that point, it's a conversation where, again,
how come it never happens that testing is too costly? How come that never happens for you?
That testing is too costly. We talk about pros and cons and we make decisions. And I guess when I say,
why have you never come up with a situation where testing was too costly though?
Because we talk about the potential costs and rework if you don't do it, and at that point, people decide to say, "Let's do it."
How did you analyze the cost and the benefits in numbers?
Because I looked at the cost of defect. I look at like defect density in your code base, and to say, hey, if we have a defect here, we get historical data about response time, and we look at a run rate to say what that costs, and we say that okay, if we can put practices in place where we can prevent that cost from occurring later on when it's the most expensive to resolve, do we want to invest in that? So yes, is it
but what was the cost? Where do you draw the line? You don't seem to have a line. That's what I'm saying. You've got, oh, hey, look, we save all this money, but how does that compare to the cost? You've never given me that.
So if I have a defect, if I have a team and we work in pairs, and I have a team that people work together, and let's say a dev day per person costs me like $500 or whatever a person, okay? And I have a critical defect, and I have data that shows on average, I get 4 of those a week because I don't have automated tests that catch problems, and I have to fix them in production and do a lot of work, and my resolution time on each of those defects for a developer pair is 2.5 days of work. And then I say on an average, I get, say, if we say it's, I got to write the math down here now. You want a business case.
But you've never had a case where the cost outweighed the benefit. Why is that? You keep talking in circles that yes, that there's a benefit. How come it never ends up the other way?
So put it this way, I guess, Craig, the challenge that I do have is...
Are your teams just good enough that they never spend a lot of cost, or is there something else going on?
I think I'm in an environment where a lot of times we implement the practice of test-driven development up front, so it's hard to have the side-by-side where here's the team that tests and here's the team that doesn't test, and be able to look at quantitative data side-by-side to see the true cost. Okay,
I think a lot of it is that you and all the teams you've worked with have sort of a dream scenario where you've already got the testing frameworks in place, and you've got large enough projects where you have runway to spend to amortize the cost. I think you're just on a different set of projects than the wide variety that the real world could throw at you would have.
Well, but this way, I choose as a career choice to work in the large organization space where those characteristics I believe you described are true. But that's a choice that I'm entitled to make, and you.
Right. I'm just saying you don't seem to. I tend to work in larger engagements as well. Usually smaller teams, though. But I think you're lacking the imagination that there could be a situation where the cost outweighs the benefit. And I'm saying there are those situations. They're going to be few and far between. We're talking about the edges here. We're not talking about most situations. Most situations, I agree. You should do TDD at pretty much the unit level, the integration level, and the user acceptance.
Have a nice, pretty test pyramid. Yes.
Yes. Although I disagree with that a tiny bit. I've seen situations where user acceptance tests could be, if they're done well, that they get easy enough that you don't have to worry about having such a small number. But it's really hard to get there.
Yeah.
All right. Next quick topic.
I was going to say, what's the last word on that whole thing? So, because I was going to say, Craig, in the spirit of...
we have spent enough time.
Well, but, I was going to say, just in the spirit of having, even had Woody on, you know what? I don't doubt that your scenario exists. And again, if you're truly starting, I know that scenario, that episode you and John and Amos did where you talked about building infrastructure. That's a good example. There's no unit test framework for that. So, and I remember since I've done a lot of work with helping to deploy cloud products to minimize deployment times, you guys, I don't understand why we want to go and build infrastructure when we could just get it off the shelf, basically. But
that's what I said that whole episode.
Yeah. So to me, this way, that's a great example. So I fully agree that your scenario may exist, but again, my background and such is kind of in environments, and the nature of my work is to say that, let's talk about, benefits and risks and make decisions. And at that point, most people have decided to see that the ability to mitigate risk and avoid cost associated with risk, there are advantages to that people are interested in. So what's your other bonus topic here that will take us to some other weird place? I'm sure.
I'm not sure if we've got time. Amos mentioned that I had told him once that never call a vote unless you already know the outcome. And you called me out on that.
I did. And that's a good one to talk about, because to me, I think it's leading. I think that I would say that, if anything, you were trying to, in our last topic, trying to say that I'm leading people on that. Oh, you always need a test. That to me, that's like saying, hey, we're having a conversation about trade-offs about testing pros and cons. And when the discussion gets to the point that we've kind of wrecked the influence diagram to where it's favorable, we call the question right then and we vote on it, which to me, again, that's not respectful. It's like everyone should be able to speak their mind, talk things out, and when everyone shared their ideas, then we vote. And
all right, so I would only use this when I want to win the vote. When, and that's not actually all the time, right? So sometimes I want the group to decide. Other times I want. So when I'm coaching, we had talked about this before. I think the last time I was on. Sometimes when you're coaching, you do need to lead the team in a direction that you believe is best for that team, even though they might not see that direction. I think that's when I would use this. I do use this sparingly. Most of the time, we're at a retrospective, we're talking about a topic. I'm not going to use that. We're going to dot vote or whatever. It's sort of when we have a big thing like, I think the team might not want to pair program, and I'm trying to introduce pair programming. That's where I would pretty much use this. I know pair programming works, and I know it's going to work in the situation that I'm facing. I'm going to talk to each individual, like we said in separate episode 78. I'm going to find what their concerns are, address them individually instead of as a group, and sort of win people over one by one. By the way, this is how Congress works too.
I was going to say that's campaigning 101. So, put it this way: if you're eliciting team or organizational change, and you're there as a change agent, and you hit resistance, and you hypothesize that there will be value in adopting a new practice. Put it this way: there's nothing wrong with that. However, I think you also need to be respectful to the people and also to the organization to say that, you know what, it might not work. I mean, pairing is a social activity. And if you have people at their core that don't want to be social and you try to force it, fun stuff happens. And again, put it this way, some organizations out there have tried to do that, especially in the space, the large organization space where, people, actually today's it's late April. There actually was an article in the Wall Street Journal today about Humana. Humana's got people pair programming in healthcare. Oh my goodness. So guess what? Everyone's going to want to pair programming in healthcare. But what the article in the Wall Street Journal didn't talk about is that Humana hired specific people that wanted to work in a collaborative manner. And so they do that. So if you just set up pairing workstations and say, go pair, that doesn't work. So you got to be smart about what you're doing. And I guess at that point, Craig, is if you are trying to elicit organization change, there is the value of doing some campaigning and then making sure that the group has concurrence, that's what they want to do after you do your campaigning. I actually don't think I call that a vote. I would actually just call that concurrence, which in my opinion is different than a vote. A vote would be a truly democratic activity, which is where I think I was calling you out because you're advocating for exactly something I agree with here totally, because you want to elicit change. So does that make sense?
I'm not sure of your distinction between a vote and, would you call it concurrence?
Concurrence. It's basically where you're asking for people to say, yes, I agree with that versus I either agree or don't agree. And the number one in law, there's different distinctions for when you ask for concurrence versus when you vote. But then more importantly, just the social dynamics. It's one thing to raise your hand and say, yes, I agree, and that's my only choice, versus I can really agree, disagree, or effectively abstain.
So those are two different ways about getting the same outcome, though.
Yeah, but again, they're
both psychological and social manipulation.
Well, they are, and to the people to the credit of people in law, they've studied it extensively. And if you've ever, having worked with a lobbyist before in D.C. For some work that I did in a different context, the lobbyists understand how do you want to put your bill through the House. There's different ways to call a vote. And based upon the nature of what you're trying to do, certain voting mechanisms have better outcomes based upon kind of how people are polling and such. So put it this way, I like this conversation because these are the type of things that if you are a coach who's working to elicit change, you need to have an influence map. You need to kind of, like Craig's saying, you need to have some both team conversations, but you also need to work one-on-one with people. So these are all things you should be doing to help you be successful in helping organizations and or teams improve. So Craig, what have we got out of this tonight? What did we do? We, as Lee would say, we've just burned up a bunch of bits on the internet. What did you get out of it?
We've added to the pile of podcasts that people can listen to.
Yeah, well, so what'd you get out of tonight? I mean, or how about you? We should, Craig, what's the question? Who should go first and share their takeaways? You or me?
I don't feel we need to do takeaways.
Last word.
First of all, I'm not sure this episode was much about takeaways for myself as me giving feedback on previous topics.
I don't know. I want to say I appreciated our conversation, Craig, because it did, kind of like I said at the onset, it helped me connect with my inner child. Because like you, well, no, but like you challenged me. I'm a perpetual optimist, and so yes, I'm going to propose things that I do value and that I've seen many times provide significant value, and because I'm committed to that, I'm gonna like the episode with Woody Zool. I'm gonna ask hard questions and say, why can't we do that, or why are you concerned about that cost, or why, or kind of more the what if. What if we don't do this? And talk those through and be very focused to that. So in that, I guess I offer that as kind of my closing statement about why I wasn't able to answer your question about the cost-benefit analysis directly like I think you were looking for.
This week's hottest picks.
So we've got some picks tonight. So I'll do mine first because there's only two of us. So this should be the fastest picks ever. So I got two. One is a book, and it's a book that I used recently for just to have some fun because I was thinking about careers, honestly. And there's a book called Business Model U, and we'll put the link to check it out on Amazon on the show notes. But if you're familiar with the business model canvas, which we've talked about before, this is a way that you can apply a modified version of the business model canvas to your resume to your career. And where I mentioned resume is I actually know a colleague who's done this activity. He's done this kind of personal business model canvas, and he now kind of uses it as his resume when he goes out and talks to people about jobs. So check it out. It's a neat idea. It's one of many ideas in the space about career evolution, but we'll check it out. Love to know if you guys think about it. It's called Business Model U. And the other one that I'll just mention is another live event. Got 80,000 live events going on here. And this is where we're going to do a 3-hour workshop on games based upon Lean and Kanban principles. This is at the it's at the David Anderson Conference, as we call it, or Lean Kanban North America, down in Miami Beach, Florida, June 8, 9, and 10. So this workshop is actually on the last day of the conference. It's on workshop day, which is Wednesday the 10th. So come down and check it out. It's actually in the very last time slot. So it's going to be a blast. We're going to blow it out. So lots of crazy games. So Craig, what do you have?
All right. My first pick is a blog post from Jessica Kerr. She posted it today or yesterday, actually. She calls it data versus awareness. And she's got a great idea here for retrospectives. So what they do is in their Slack channel, if something's bugging you, they've got a little emoticon, and they'll put the little emoticon and write what's bugging them. And they've got something also, if something's making them happy, they have a separate emoticon for that. And at the end of the week, they gather up all those posts to Slack, and they make a word cloud. They make one for the positive things and one for the negative things. And then they know what to talk about at retro. Now, the brilliant thing about this is that at a retro, you're going to forget what happened throughout the week or two or three between retros. And as she points out, you're most likely to remember the peaks and the most recent things. So, if something made you emotional, you'll probably remember that thing. Otherwise, you'll probably remember the most recent thing that happened. Like if yesterday was a good day, you'll think that your week was a good week. And there's actually a lot of scientific studies to back that kind of thing up. So she's actually using data, or her team is using data to sort of get over that little scientific fact that you're not going to remember everything equally. So they do that by gathering data throughout the week and then addressing it at the end of the week at the retro. All right. My second pick is an article by Malcolm Gladwell in The New Yorker. So if you're allergic to his writing, stay away from it. It's called The Engineer's Lament, and it's a pretty long article. Most things in The New Yorker are, I suppose. And it goes through sort of the ways that engineers think and trade-offs and things like that.
Interesting. Those are great. Actually, the retro one sounds really interesting, you mentioned, Craig, so we'll have to check that out. So, well, guess what? That's all the time we have for this episode of This Agile Life. So we'll make sure we put our show notes out that will have these picks, and as well as some interesting notes about all the wonderful, interesting things that Craig and I discussed today. So, Craig, thanks for coming out tonight. Did you have fun?
Thanks. I suppose.
Well, that's a yes or no question. Jeez. I can't talk about pros and cons I can't talk about cost benefit.
Fun part of the time.
Oh, fun part of the time. Okay. Well, guess what? That could be the next joke we don't answer is what part was fun and what part wasn't. So, but most importantly, we hope you guys had fun tonight and you might have learned something tonight or I think tonight we definitely made a lot of people think. So, we'd love to hear what you thought about. So, give us some feedback. You can reach us via our website at thisagilelife.com, or you can follow us on Twitter and, of course, send us feedback on Twitter at thisagilelife. So that's all for this episode, and most importantly, keep living this agile life. We'll talk to you again real soon.
This Agile Life is brought to you by a community of Agile developers and coaches aspiring to spread the word about this groundbreaking approach to software development. Join us at thisagilelife.com/community.